Good evening, good morning. It's not morning here, despite the bright light out my window. It's just summertime. It's evening. It's the Mattriarchy. It's Thursday night. I am Matt Reese. I am here with Captain Cummings and FlyFoxPro, and whoever else happens to get here. And we got some other folks on deck. Have not arrived yet, and who knows if they will. I'm not in charge of that, but that's fine. Today we are going to talk. Our topic is our third installment of Welcome Flying Saucer, Welcome the Metal there in the chat. It's our third installment of the, I guess it's a series now, of Christianity and comics, different views from fans, from creators, about the faith and about the comics we love and what that intersection is. And oh my goodness, my computer is telling me it needs to be plugged in. So, hey, Captain, introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Captain Cummings, and I'm excited to be here today and see all you lovely people. That's all I got. I don't know.
Oh man,
so there's not that much special about me, you know.
Oh, I got this great book in today. So I saw this cool thing on eBay that was from Robin Snyder. If you don't know who that is, she managed Steve Ditko's projects. And I saw a thing on eBay that was like the history of comics, and so it was only one, of a publishing that they put out. I don't know how often it came out, but I went and asked her if they had a collected issues of those. And she turned me on to this, the complete 4-page series of other essays by Steve Ditko, and it's called Ditko Complains. And so it's a bunch of objectivist rants, probably. I haven't got a chance to read it yet. But.
It's called Ditko Complains. That's perfect. So, joining us just now, we haven't really gotten around to introducing everybody yet, but No1 Marmaduke Fan, Dan Connor, thank you guys for coming on.
How's it going? Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Okay.
I got my convention banner behind me because I don't have anywhere else to take it.
I know, right? Oh my goodness. It's been for those of you guys... For those of you guys who don't know, Dan is the creator of My Gal the Zombie, as well as worked on a bunch of other stuff, and is a stalwart of the Front Range con scene, and they're all dead.
Yeah, there's no more conventions. They all died. They're done.
Okay, we're getting a bad lag, so I think you guys are both try talking at the same time.
Are you getting echoing? Should I put on headphones?
No, I'm not getting an echo. Just there's a time lapse lag, I think, and I'm not sure if it's the connection speed or what.
Could be anything. I don't know.
Yeah, could be sunspots. I don't know. So
yeah.
But yeah, so let's.
Cool. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you back, man. So, and of course, this is not to jump the queue, but Dan did a webcomic for a number of years called Heaven Forbid, which was well. Why don't you go ahead and talk about it, Dan? It's your comic.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of. Well, I do a lot of comics, and some really cool indie comics would have a Christian character, like the. And then a lot of comics.
Oh man, Dan, I don't want to interrupt you. We're having you're
don't.
Oh, the lag is really bad. I'm going to suggest that you try dropping out, try and join again, and see if that takes care of it. Because sometimes that helps. Okay. Well, I hope that works out okay. I know. I hate that. So, but anyway, while Dan is gone, uh, Captain, why are you involved in comic books? What's your reason for being there?
For being for reading comic books?
Yes, in the comic space.
I don't know. I like a lot of it's like, going to garage sales, meeting people and buying their junk. Getting excited when you find something cool, reading it, finding out it's either better or sometimes terrible than what you thought it was going to be. I used to love watching movies, but for some reason I haven't been so excited to watch movies as much now. And I still like movies from the 70s and 80s, but I think it really has to do with like the production value that they put into the movies and how long, especially how long they make them. I like movies that are like an hour and a half to 2 hours. You go any longer than that, and I just get bored watching it. So, like, reading is taken over, which usually takes even longer, but I don't know.
Dan, hey, is
Yeah.
it better now?
Yes. Oh my goodness,
Okay,
yes.
well, I forgot because I just got home. I was on my my phone data instead of my Wi-Fi, so that's what it was. Yep, that'll do it.
That'll do it. Okay, so Cap just talked a little bit about doing the comics thing. Dan, why don't we go ahead and pick up where you left off and tell us about Heaven Forbid?
Yeah, so I would often read comics, especially like real world comics, and I think it's the same way with television or whatever form of media, is that you have a bit of, I'm trying to make sure that I have this set up decently. I think that you have a bit of religious erasure in media, because for me, when I was a kid, like in some groups I would be the Christian kid, like I'd be the only one, and I think that that's actually pretty common, but you don't see that in media. Like in Nothing Nice to Say, in that webcomic, it goes back many years, and it was a punk rock webcomic as well. So that's what originally got me into it. But they were Christian characters, and they kind of like laughed at them or joked around with them. They still were friends, like, but they existed. Like there were lesbian characters who, it wasn't really token. That's just who they were. And then there were punk rock characters, and there's like a giant like weasel character or something. And so there were all these characters, and they weren't necessarily like, it didn't really matter what sort of like who they hung out with, what lunch table they sat at, because they were all kind of like punk rockers or whatever. And the Christian kid liked a lot of ska music, we jokes about that too. But anyway, like he was there, and I always thought that was kind of cool. So I thought, well, what if you had a comic about those characters and who they are, like the Christian kid in just a regular group, or say something like Blue Monday. That's a great comic, or Ninja High School, and you don't have like and again, those aren't really completely real world. Blue Monday had very good, but or even Scott Pilgrim. It's like, well, why does no one in Scott Pilgrim know a Christian? Like, there's all these different friends, all these different people, but none of them know any Christians. It's like this religious erasure, and I think that, let alone other religions made something as well. Like, you don't talk about that, and I get it with X-Men. Like, to me, I'm like, oh, Colossus is going to hell because he's an atheist and he worships Karl Marx, and then I'd be like, for whoever else, and I get like that. I get it for superheroes, because superheroes they represent things, they aren't things, I think, in some ways. They're metaphor more than they're tangible. But for these like almost autobio comics, or more like slice of life comics, even if it's like Scott Pilgrim and there's fantasy elements, but if it's supposed to represent demographics, and at that time, like Nothing Nice to Say, like or Scott Pilgrim, I mean, they have all sorts of different characters. Blue Monday probably did. But so they had Nothing Nice to Say had a Christian in it, and so Heaven Forbid was kind of that. It was kind of like, okay, let's kind of look at those characters, and again, look at TV. Like, if you just have like some sitcom, there isn't usually the Christian kid, but if you go to a high school, there is, and so it's this weird like erasure. And I get it in superheroes. Like, I'm sorry, Colossus. I think I can safely say we all know where you're going to go. But I'm joking. But at the same time, when I was a kid, I'm like, what? He's an atheist? Like, that's not with my belief system. And so that's hard, I think, for superhero fans. But I'm not talking about superheroes. I'm talking about slice of life stuff. I think it is best to probably keep religion, because maybe Rogue's a Baptist, but is she really, though? You know, it's like, when you get down to that, well, Batman's Anglican, but he doesn't go to church because he's lapsed or whatever. You know, it's like, okay, it makes sense that Batman would be Anglican, or maybe he's Catholic. I don't remember. There's probably different takes, but it's like, okay, those characters, you know, they're the essence of something, like metaphors, as opposed to more slice of life stuff. So that's what Heaven Forbid was. So they play rock and roll, and they have band concerts that no one goes to, not because they're Christians, but because they're lousy bands. And then I did like a zombie story of one, like if they were in a sitcom, it was like a zombie version. And then I've been doing that for like 5 years. So that's how Heaven Forbid bridges to my knowledge. It's an alternate version.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Kind of reminds me of the trend of like not just like Christians being ignored in media, but also like weird hybrid Christians. Like if a Hollywood writer doesn't know much about Christianity, they'll just combine like Catholics and evangelicals and fundamentalists into this one like weird like combination of different Christian beliefs that doesn't really exist.
Yeah. That was something I saw not long ago, and it was like that. I was like, okay, number one, you got a crucifix on the wall, so we know you're Catholic. Number two, you're not adhering to any semblance of Catholic theology. Clearly, this is some sort of like generic Protestantism. And I'm just like, did you not know anyone on the set that ever had been to a church and knew that if you're a Catholic, you have Jesus on the cross, and if you're a Protestant, you don't, and that people died over this?
Yeah.
But no, they don't. They don't, because it's erasure. And here's the thing. If you're on the movie set and you are a Christian, you're not going to point that out. If you're an intern, you're not going to point that out to the director. Because number one, if they find out you're a Christian, you're probably, like if you're really a Christian, you're probably not going to keep that job too long. And number two, not because you'll be fired necessarily for being a Christian, but there'll probably be some sort of conflict. It's very hard to stay employed as a Christian almost in any industry, even in religious industries, if not more so, even in Christian ones. And so there's that, let alone you're not going to call the director on it, and you're not going to be the director. It's just not going to happen. You could be Mel Gibson. That's it.
Yeah,
sure.
Mel Gibson probably knows his Catholics from Protestants okay.
He probably does, but he said a lot about Jews when he gets pulled over for drunk driving as well. So I don't know how much I'm interested in what he knows about Catholics and Protestants.
I think he's a Sedevacantist, actually. Like Mel Gibson.
Yeah, I think so.
He's more Catholic than the Pope.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you don't know what Sedevacantist
like
is,
like a splinter group Catholic. I forget the details.
Yeah, it's pre-Vatican II, right?
Vatican I.
So the Pope, they think that the throne, basically the seat of St. Paul is empty, and then they would say that there is no like genuine Pope, and some would go as far as to say that anyone ordained past that wasn't ordained by someone that was like legitimate is not an ordained priest.
What if you're ordained by Jesus?
I'm not a Catholic, so it doesn't make any difference to me.
Yeah. That's we're a little light on the Catholics on this edition. I had Doug Ernst and Tim Lim on the first time we did this, and they're both dyed in the wool Catholic, but we're a little light today. So
who was on?
Doug Ernst and Tim Lim. They're I don't know if you're familiar with them. Doug Ernst has been doing YouTube reviews for a number of years, and before that he had a comic blog. And this last year he wrote a comic called Soul Finder about an order of Catholic exorcists. That's they're all former military guys. It's one of the best comics I've read. Hey, check it out right there. He's got it with him. I think it's a great comic. It's a great comic. Very, very, very Catholic.
Very nice.
Yeah, that's cool. No, I've got, honestly, to me, it's not really about Catholic or Protestant. I mean, I think it's just about who you are. I knew a lot of people that are like, well, you know them Catholics, they ain't going to heaven. I was like, yeah, a lot of us aren't either.
Yeah,
I
that's
couldn't stand with that too much. But
yeah, that's
was that Tim Lim that does the My Hero Macadamia?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's cool. I don't think I've ever spoken with him. I probably interact with him on Facebook. But his Ninja Turtle stuff is really good as well. So.
Oh man, yeah. And they just they just did a cover this last year for the Street Fighter 20th anniversary swimsuit edition or whatever, that he had the cover on that one too.
Nice.
But yeah, and
I don't know if Protestants can draw swimsuit issues or not.
Oh yeah, but
Baptists cannot draw swimsuit issues.
Baptists can't draw.
They will get you at the convention, and they will be like, "Let's vote out this guy." I'm sure you probably could get. But
Baptists can't draw that when they're around another Baptist. It's fine
no, that's true. You can't draw it around another Baptist. No, I've never. For all the Anarch Press stuff I've done, I've never done an Anarch Press swimsuit issue.
Yeah.
There was a Warrior Nun swimsuit issue, though. I'm pretty sure.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that was about to be on Netflix.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited about that. So I got to rep the Catholics for Warrior Nun.
Yeah. I tell you, I was actually really excited to hear that they were taking that.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge Warrior Nun fan. I just got into it. I read about it. I'd seen it around, but I had never picked it up. I picked up the first trade a couple years ago, and it's an intriguing blend of stuff.
It's great.
It's very, very 90s in terms of its aesthetic, of course.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's got I think my favorite thing about it from a doctrinal perspective is it's unwavering in the concept of the puissance of faith, right? That the faith has power, that faith matters. And that's not something that shows up in a lot of comics that treat that. Soul Finder does a really good job of it too, but a lot of comics that try to discuss faith stuff, it's sort of it's either treated as an aside, like you would with Nightcrawler, where he's Catholic but it never really comes up, or a thing where
came up a while
where it's sort of where it's like a get out of jail free card kind of thing, where there's not the struggle for it. And I think that Ariella Warrior did a pretty good job of it being hard fought kind of a thing.
Yeah, no, I think Warrior Nun's great. Some of the first miniseries or two, she could have maybe had a little bit more fabric on her habit. Honestly, she could have. And if Ben was here, I would about that. I love Ben Dunn. But no, the comic itself's great, and I really like the Craig LeVere stuff. I always, for a while, I was maybe going to write it 20 years ago, but they canceled the book. But I was like, they said they were into it. They said they liked what I had together. And if the series wasn't canceled, they probably would have went with it. They had to cancel the book before I got on it. I would have turned it around. Sales would have been off the charts. If only. I think I did a cameo of her in something else. But
yeah, because you interned at Antarctic, yeah?
Yeah. I interned there right out of high school, and I met David Hutchison. That watch. I always put on my middle finger, so I don't know if that gets you YouTube stuff, but it gets you demonetized. But David Hutchison that works on Nightmare with me, or did, because we finished it now. I met him the first day that I was interning, so I've known him almost 20 years now, and I don't think anybody else on YouTube. I mean, they put out the Mike Outlaw Zombie trade in Diamond. Yeah, so I did a lot for them, and then I was on staff for a while, and then I never had my own ongoing title with them, but I just have a lot of like an anthology. They love anthologies. And I just do short stories and lots of stuff. So, but yeah, I was always doing that right out of high school. So there was a lot of Christian like all the time. And just Antarctic Press is out of Texas, so they're never too far from conservative stuff or from Christian stuff. I'm not saying that they're not a Christian company, but they're definitely people who would personally probably share their faith.
Yeah, I think some of my two of my favorite titles coming out right now, Antarctic publishes, and that's the Punchline, that Bill Williams and Matt Weldon. I love Punchline, and Rags, which is not what you'd call a Christian book.
That one's not neither of those are Christian ones.
But it is quality. It is quality. Yeah. I tell you what, I think.
And those are like not from inside the studio. Those are, I think, for the most part, those are like, because they have their own office where they produce stuff, and then there's also people like Timothy Lamb who just, they're not like from in house, but they'll pick up books. They used to almost never do that, but they've been doing stuff like that. So yeah, they've been around they've almost like there's so many people who went through there. Like they don't get a lot of praise like Oni Press or like because they've been cutting edge on a number of things. Like they were some of the first people to ever color comics, and they were the first independent publisher to put out their own action figures or at least on a decent sized scale. They even put out Usagi Yojimbo. Like they put out some good stuff like directly with Stan Smith. And they were some of the first that did computer coloring. A lot of things that they really kind of took the forefront of. But they've never been like hit like in the same way that like Oni Press is cool, stuff like that. Like they've never been like trendy or like hipster at all. It's just kind of, and I think there's some good stuff to that. But yeah, like I would stand by them. I mean, I know they had some controversy a few years ago with yours was that Jawbreakers book, and people were just saying terrible things about them. And I was like, there were stores that were like, we're not going to carry any books, any Antarctic Press books, because of this. And I was like, what about Fred Perry and Gold Digger? He has nothing to do with Jawbreakers, nothing to do with it. You're going to not carry Fred Perry's book? He's been doing this book. He has an Inkpot Award. He's been doing this book for like 300 issues, and you're just going to say, no, we won't carry it because of that. And I was just like, these people? Like, they put out Strangers in Paradise. They put out diverse material in the 90s before like that was hip or cool. And I'm like, you're not going to carry this stuff, so that they kind of got a bad rap for a while. And I'm not going to debate any of that stuff with Jawbreakers or anything. I mean, I've never read it, but I was just like, Antarctic Press is some good people. Like, there's some good people there. So
cool. Well, thank you very much, Dan. I'm going to move the thing, and Garrett has joined us. Doug, did you do something different with your beard?
No, it's still the same.
I don't know. Something's different about your aspect, and I can't put my finger on it. But thanks for coming.
Sorry I'm late. Yeah.
No, it's fine. So, just talking to Dan. Doug, go ahead and tell us why you got into comics. We're doing the round table here. So.
Well, it's the same old thing everybody always says. I had some comics when I was a kid. I love Ninja Turtles. I love Spider-Man. And I didn't enjoy reading in school at all. It was just boring. I could read well, could always read well, but I was just really, really bored. And so my parents were like, you like Ninja Turtles, you like Spider-Man, here's these comic books. And so that just I really got into comic books. And there's already characters I love because the cartoons existed, and as a child you'd love cartoons. And so it always stuck with me because there's always comics for every age group, and you can kind of grow with comics. Of course, now comics are more adult-oriented now than they've ever been at any point in history. But I've always found something in comics for me. I've had years when I was in high school, it wasn't cool to read comics, and the small town I'm in, they weren't available. So I've kind of had this on and off kind of love affair with comic books.
Yeah, man.
Cool. Already talked to Captain. So, Fly Fox, tell us, what's your comic journey?
My comic journey, I don't know, finding a Jack Chick tract in a telephone booth.
Yeah, man, that's good
That
stuff.
doesn't happen anymore, right? I remember those very well. Like every time I'd see a payphone, I'd go and look and see if there was a chick tract in them. That was like ubiquitous. There was always a chick tract in those. And so sometimes my dad would let me take them, and sometimes he'd be like, "No, say put them there for people to read them that aren't Christians." But I grew up reading mostly Archie, and then when I was a little bit older, I went to the library and read a bunch of Silver Age and Golden Age stuff. And so for me, those were like the big influences on me, like reading old Captain Marvels or Superman, or the Silver Age Flash, Green Lantern team up books, and like those things were really influential on me. And then as I grew older, I always liked drawing and doing stuff like that. And then I wanted to be a filmmaker, and so I moved into doing video production, and I did that for a long time. And I've always liked storytelling, and so I sort of went back to that comic well that I've enjoyed for all these years, and started trying to tell stories that way.
Cool. No1 Marmaduke Fan, you're the only person we haven't heard extensively from yet.
Alrighty. Well, my comics journey, let's see. I grew up in a rural area far away from any comic book shop. My older brother collected, Ninja Turtles comics. He had like the graphic novel editions they came out with in the 80s. He bought some of Spider-Man's 90s run. And my dad, I remember when eBay was first a thing, it was brand new. He went on there and he bid on like a long box of comics. I don't know how much he ended up bidding for it, but he must have gotten like an insanely good deal on this giant long box of 70s Hulk comics that I read and reread and gave them away. That's my own version of the boomer. I had Batman issue 1, and my mom threw it away. I had probably like 80 comics from the Hulk 60s and 70s era, and gave them away because I didn't think they'd be worth anything. And now I've been kicking myself about that ever since.
That's the best thing you could do with them, though.
Yeah, give them to some other kid. They went on a journey.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, that's what's supposed to happen with comics,
Right.
I actually take my trades when I get done reading them, and I just leave them around campus, just like shelves and stuff. Hopefully, somebody actually reads them, doesn't throw them away.
Yeah.
Hopefully, library is great for that. If you just want to find a place to, donate a whole bunch of books you don't want.
But now they sell them.
Yeah.
A lot of times they don't put them on the shelves. Like at one time I was like, hey, I want to give your, like I was doing this thing at a library. It was like a Girl Scouts, like drawing, like make comics class. And I was like, hey, these girls want to read my book. I just want to donate this to the library, and then they can check this one out. And they're like, well, if you donate it, we're just going to sell it. I was like, no, I want you to put it on your shelf. They're like, no, we can't do that.
Because they're kind of sticklers about like organizing their collections, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because I witnessed
they get so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say they get so much money, like from like the organizations that run them to buy new books. They like a lot of libraries have special grant programs for getting new books. So they really have a disincentive for keeping old books around very long.
Yeah.
So I used to feel kind of guilty about having like I have this huge collection of books, right? And I kind of hoard books. Well, and part of the thing is I felt guilty for a while, and I'm like, no, I don't need to have all of these books. I don't need to take up all of my space in my house. And so I started thinning some out because I could get books at the library. But then I noticed that they were selling the books I kept checking out. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, if I want to have access to this book year after year, I have to buy it. Yeah. And so like, especially the niche interest books I have, like in heraldry and medieval games and the weird crap that I keep borrowing again and again.
Like this book?
Yeah.
An encyclopedia of comics from the 1970s.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. That doesn't
Yeah.
sound that weird to me.
Yeah, but that would be one of those things where my library would be just like, well, one guy has checked this out repeatedly for a long time. We're going to sell it instead.
Yeah, they're like, you can't check it out.
You can't have this book anymore, man. Go buy your own copy.
Yeah.
What?
Good dude.
So, but yeah, so that's one thing. I mean, nothing against libraries. I think they're great. I think the library system we have is one of the things that makes America a great place. That this is a thing we've considered a value.
but
but-
they're socialistic libraries.
Yeah, today's policies, I'm not a big fan of. Let's just put it that way. It's in a lot of ways that's true, but in libraries
I'm
specifically.
joking, but yeah, I struggle a little bit. I'm like, okay, libraries. I can support libraries. Libraries and roads. I can support them.
Yeah. Well, and yeah. I'd rather support libraries than a lot of things that we end up supporting, but that's a whole different story. So, we've kind of talked about how we got into comics, each of us. What about your Christian faith? What are your thoughts on God? How did you come to those kind of things? And we'll start with you, Doug. Last in, first out.
Okay. So my whole life, I've grown up in church. Little country church,
Awesome.
real fire and brimstone kind of churches. Went to Sunday school my whole life. My grandpa were Sunday school teachers. As I got older, my dad became a preacher. And so we spent pretty much every day of the week we was at church somewhere. And when I got into high school, I got really tired of going to church all the time. I had a job, whatever days I wasn't working, I had to go to church. Kind of struggled with that for a few years. Then after high school, went to church, did all that stuff. But the whole time I'm playing in rock and roll bands and kind of traveling around and hanging out with very unchristian people. And for years just kind of struggled with the whole thing, Here I am in the middle of I don't want to offend anybody.
Why not?
We'll just call them liberals. I'm right here in the middle of a pack of liberals, and they're all, pro-abortion, everything that I've never believed in. And, we travel around and I see all this stuff and, you just kind of, you start to struggle sometimes. You start to doubt. If you live your life in the middle of a pack of, I'm going to call them reprobates.
Good word.
It'll rub off on you. And so I had years where I got out of church. I've always believed in God. I believed that Jesus came to earth and died for our sins. I've always believed that since I was a kid. But I struggled with, I always believed it was real, but I always struggled with the generic things people struggle with, like, well, why does this happen? Or why do these people do this? And so on and so forth. And the last few years, I've really just, I think as you get older, and the Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and he'll not depart from it.
Yep.
I believe when you get older, you remember all that stuff. No matter if you're surrounded by reprobates, liberals, whatever, I believe that God plants that inside you, and you'll come back to it. I hit a point in my life where it was either, I'm gonna believe in this and do what I'm supposed to completely, or I'm gonna be a reprobate. And so, like, I know I'm just rambling just immensely.
Oh, that's fine, man.
It's I don't know, it's such a journey. And a lot of people think if you grow up in church, and your dad's a preacher, that you're this awful kid because you just run around wild and do all this awful stuff. I was always a really good kid. And for a long time, and I don't know what everybody believes, and I don't know how theological everybody wants to get, but just being a good person, in my beliefs, doesn't get you in heaven. You can be a good person, you know, good work. What is it? The Bible says your works are as filthy rags.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Menstrual cloths.
you know, for a long time, I kind of struggled with that too, because I've been a terrible person. I've done terrible, terrible things, which we all do. We all struggle. And what I've been trying to get the whole time is I've struggled with, how can I be this terrible and still claim to love God? And the last few years, I've really come to terms with it and really come to peace with it. You know, you have that doubt in your heart, but all you can do is just turn it over to God and go from there. And sorry I rambled, but
no, I think that's
how I roll.
No, I think that's a big question. Is like, you know, how can we reconcile our depravity, right? To put the big theological name on it, right? Our depravity with the fact that we claim to love something that's so transcendently good, we can't hardly imagine it. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a real struggle. But I also think that's sort of the point of it all, right? Is that that's the measure of the goodness of God, is that He's that much that good, and like His grace is that big, that it makes up for that.
Sometimes you hate to even wear that label because you feel like such a disappointment.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's I don't want to be the guy they go, well, look what that guy did. You know, look what that guy did. That guy's such a hypocrite. I'm not going to church. You know, God's not real because of that guy. I don't want to be that guy.
No, yeah, I absolutely feel like that. Like, when I was young, I still do have some of the, you know, the witness wear shirts. I'm wearing my third day shirt right now, right? And there's days it's just like, man, I don't know that I should go around. Maybe I'm too dirty to be wearing something that talks about how good God is. And I mean, I don't want to be that guy, but I don't know that I am that guy, but I know that I mean, I just say I don't know if everyone else sees me as that guy, but I know I am that guy. Like I'm wretched. Yeah. So that's my take on it. Dan, you're the next in line. Talk to us, man.
What was it? Just my Christian testimony?
Yeah.
Okay, so my dad was a missionary in Alaska when I was born, and he then became an Army chaplain. So so I was pretty much raised with that. There are few Sundays of my life when I have not been in a church building, except for this past year up until all this COVID stuff, when I was doing more comic conventions and pretty much trying to do a different convention every week. And so I was missing church some for that, but so that's kind of my thing there. I guess somewhere along with high school. See, junior high, I really wasn't one of those sort of people that other people like kind of liked. And so when I would go to church, and even like later, even at later elementary, I struggled a lot because we moved around a lot with my dad in the Army. But the reality is, if my dad hadn't been in the Army, I still wouldn't probably have gotten along with anyone. And it just wasn't easier being a new kid. But at church, I could get people to be friendly. And so I always liked that, and I would always like going to church. And then I got into I did a lot. That was also why I liked comics, is because you don't have to have friends. You can just like comics. You don't really kind of work that way. So that was why I did that. And then I got into music as well. And in junior high, so I was doing a lot of churchy stuff and singing a lot of Christian bands, like a lot of Christian punk bands. Because when I got into punk rock, I mean, I was getting into like a lot of Christian punk, like it was just all together. And into those shows and everything, all these shows that you couldn't have nowadays. I mean, goodness, if you said some of the things that those bands said on stage, it's not tolerated now. Not in the world at large, at least maybe in churches it's still okay. So then in high school we moved again, and I started going to a church, and they were just really hardcore about just what do you call it, like drive-by evangelism or something. Like we would go and we'd have like this week in the summer when we go knock on doors, and we do it like once a week anyway. And you just knock on someone's door and be like, "Hey, we're gonna have pizza at church, but why don't you like accept the Lord or something?" And they'd be like, "Oh yeah, man, but I'm watching Judge Judy." And I'd be like, "You only need a minute. It's not gonna take long." You know? So they would say a prayer, and then you'd be like, "Oh yeah, man, they're not going to hell now. They're gonna not be with all those worms that are on fire, but aren't consumed in hell." And then a few years later, I was like, "That's kind of weird," because it's just like I get door-to-door evangelism, like that's cool or whatever, but it's just so, I think, fruitless. Now, I think some people end up actually getting saved, and then they end up running from it the rest of their lives. And I think the Lord's like, "Hey, remember that during that commercial break of Judge Judy in the afternoon, you were watching Maury, there was a commercial break, and you answered the door, and I came into your heart, and I'm sorry because I'm not leaving now." I think some of that stuff happens, but I think for some people, they're like, "Yeah, if I pray for Jesus, will you leave me alone? Because I got to find out who the dad is on Maury." And, no, yeah, it's true.
No,
it's true.
It's
because there's always the afternoon.
It's true. No, I think you're absolutely.
And they'd be like, "Yeah, I'll pray for that, whatever." And so we did that a lot, and so I pretty much learned like in high school as a teenager, the first conversation you have with someone is, "Do you love the Lord?" So like that was the thing. Like you're gonna know, like the first conversation I ever had with anybody, like when I was for a while. And then and I always wanted to be like a churchy minister, like work at a church. And in high school there was like this punk rock church, and there were some other comic nights there, and so we would do that, and I had a lot of fun with that. And then I actually did get licensed and ordained. I got my degree in Christian studies, and I was doing some work at some churches. I had a paid job at a church, and then I was always doing comics on the side. And like even like at Mattriarchy Press and everything, I was doing that. And so then I was teaching school to pay the bills, and then I was just volunteering at churches, which is what I really like. And so then we moved to Denver, where my wife's from, and we've been to a lot of different churches. And the most like ministry churchy things that I've done are probably at Scum of the Earth, which I like a lot. But my life's just been a disaster. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And there's a lot of people. I'm not saying that other people. I would say my life's a disaster. I wouldn't say it's bad, because I don't want to belittle other people's situations. I mean, I have a lot of blessings. I get to eat food every day, and but yeah, there's just so many things that I wouldn't want to do. So it's good to see that experience. And so it's a struggle for me because, like, for one, I don't really fit in at like a mainstream church, like a cool people church, because I'm pretty much a disaster of a person, and I can go to like punk rock churches and be all right, but then I'm also like, I think in a lot of settings, I'll be the weirdest person that can still fit in that setting. Like I might be with like the most hardcore like anime nerds that are completely like counterculture and everything, but I can hang out with that group, even though I can also go hang out like when I was a school teacher, just with like regular people who were school teachers. And so like I can fit in at like regular people churches, and some like homeless people and fringe people can't. I was talking to a friend of mine. We were talking about different ministry, and I was like, well, I said, I feel like I'd have more in common with the guy sleeping in front of the cool restaurant than in the cool restaurant, like trying to tell people about Jesus or whatever. Like, I don't fit in with that. I feel more comfortable with the guy on the sidewalk. And so anyway, I wanted to do, like, I wish that. So, and I worked at the Denver Rescue Mission for a while. That was really hard. The drug dealing is really what brought that down. That was the hardest part, and I get it. I get it when people are like, if you're in a position of ministry where you can make money doing drugs, like, I get it, but it's hard. And I ultimately didn't stay there as related to things like that. And that was just and so I walked away from that just to be a big mess. And I've done a pretty good job being a pretty terrible person. And I mean, we talk about, people say, why do bad things happen to good people? I'm like, you find me a good person, we'll talk with them about finding one. We'll see. If you find one, we'll ask them. We'll ask them if you find one. But I think people are like comic books, because you are not going to get a mint comic. It doesn't exist. The fact that you staple the pages make it imperfect. It is impossible to have every comic book has a flaw, and people are the same. Now, you can have a comic that's a CGC 9.9, and you can have a perfect bound comic like that, I guess, it's not actually cut, I mean stapled. And you can have a comic that went through the washing machine. Neither one of them is perfect. They're all, every back issue you buy is in bad condition. None of them are perfect condition. There's no such thing. And people are the same. It's like, well, okay, is it a fair edition? Is it a poor edition? Is it very fine? Well, it's none of them are mint. You might have near mint, and maybe the near mint guy will get to heaven and say, St. Peter, let me in. And he'll be like, nah, man, because like nobody gets a 10.0 TGC. You know, maybe the Lord can cover you up and get you in, but sorry, a 9.9 is not going to cut it. And I think that's one of the most hardcore ways to see that even a little blemish, it's not a 10.0.
Yeah. I think I've nenever heard anybody use a comic grading metaphor to talk about sin, but
Yeah,
I like it. As a guy with 5 filing cabinets full of comics in the next room, I really like that.
Yeah, comic fans will get that, because and I forget, CGC may have, I think I heard about a book that one time did have a 10.0, but they've been grading 9.9 perfect bound books. They've been grading perfect bound books at 9.9. There were a number of Ninja Turtles number 100 like that, and I think I heard that there were some others as well. And I think the reason is that, in fact, there's no way to actually prove something's a 9.9, because or a 10.0. By opening a comic, it is no longer a 10.0. Mm-hmm. So it's like a 9.9 is like, we think it might be a 10.0, but we can't say 10.0 because to prove it's a 10.0, it will no longer be a 10.0.
Right.
And I think that they can only do that with perfect bound books because they're not physically stapled. A comic book is stapled. It has holes in the paper. It's an imperfect thing.
Right, and the stapling process wrinkles it at the corners.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I feel like that's a better metaphor for Schrodinger's cat than the Schrodinger's cat metaphor is.
No, I agree. It's just
are the pages fluted? Is the cat fluted? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's the same thing.
Cat's fluted.
Yeah, if you grade a comic, it's no longer a 10.0. So anyway, but I think Sin's the same way. Is even if you have that 1.01 flaw or 0.1 flaw, you're not going to get into 10.0 CBC.
And that actually lines up with what Galatians talks about with the law, right? That it's there to show you can't attain it. It exists to demonstrate your brokenness. That's the only reason the standard exists, or not the only, but it's among the reasons the standard exists.
Yeah, and again, if 10.0s get to heaven, well, sorry, because they're not there, and 9.9 won't cut it, but it could look real nice. It looks pretty.
Yeah,
You have
and
an
the other thing I really like about that too is Captain Cummings was talking about earlier when you were having problems about his
I
love
got
of
lots of problems. He must have
no,
been
I
talking
mean with
a while.
the technical problems earlier.
No, I know.
He mentioned that part of what he loves, one of the things he loves doing is going to garage sales and going through people's collections and the
Line up their Bible.
finding those books that are sometimes treasures and sometimes not, and meeting, talking to the people and hearing their stories.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is really interesting about that is, I almost prefer reading battered comics, right?
No,
Because you can see the love in them. I got a
Yeah.
copy of Mr. Miracle 1 that I bought because some kid had really, really, really wanted it to be a Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange comic. And so Mr. Miracle has Doctor Strange's cape drawn on it in several of the pages, right? And he really, really wanted Doctor Strange comic. And so I bought it because it was in crappy shape, because it had somebody put so much love into it. But for those of us who love the medium of comics and love the smell and everything, if using the imperfection of a comic is a metaphor for sin, God loves the comics. Our goodness is in His appreciation and in His longing for us, it's not in something we have in of ourselves, and it's His love for us in the same way that we might love a battered comic and even cherish a battered comic. I was earlier this week we were talking about the comics, idea about bags and shipping and all kinds of stuff over there on Twitter, and it was a real trash fire. But it reminded me of a story from when I was first getting into comics when I was like 12, and I had a bunch of comics from 1990, Robin #2 and Batman, I think 423, that I had just read, and the covers were almost falling off. And I didn't know anything about acid-free bags. I didn't know anything like that stuff. So I took some bags from the inside of cereal boxes and washed them out and made a bag with tape to store my comics in, several of them, just to keep the covers in place, so that they were in my stack of comics in my box under my bed, so that they wouldn't get torn off as I rifled through them. And and of course they were so messed up, and I still have them. But it was one of those things where that's in terms of looking at that metaphor about faith, our goodness is from God's love. Our worth is from God's love, not from something that we can make of ourselves. Christ paid the ultimate price at that garage sale of the soul for us. And I thought that gets kind of clumsy, but I think it fits right along with that. And I just that idea of using the CGC as a mark for perfection, that's a great word picture. I love it.
Thank you. It's one of the very few things that people can really see about. Like one time I was at a thing, and they were like, "Hey, here's a cool bottle of water." They're like, "Yeah, it looks really good." And they're like, "What if I spit in it?" And they're like, "No, maybe not." And then this one guy, they're like, "Hey, do you want to still drink this water?" Or they're like, "Do you want to drink this water? It's 100% good." And he's like, "Yeah, I would drink that water." And then he spits in it. He's like, "Now do you want it?" And the guy's like, I guess so. So it was like, he's like, "Oh, now it's only 99% good water," and he's like, "I still drink it. I don't drink it." It kind of backfired.
It's not brown and full of chunks. I don't know what your problem is, man.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that analogy works good. I mean, someone could be like, Jesus was a 10.0, but he gave away his slab so that you were a 0.5, and then you got the 10.0 slab. I don't know.
You're going for broke.
So, Marmaduke, tell us, take the baton, man.
Well, I kind of resonated with Doug's story a bit, with kind of like that pattern of, from a very early age. I think I remember reading like those Bible learn to read books that the Lutheran Church used to put out. I think we read one about like let my people go, right, at like a first grade reading level, and I got really interested and started asking about death and mortality, and that led to me having a gospel conversation with my mom. I believe I had saving faith at a very early age, but I also kind of like went through a long period of just, I guess, like floating through life and not like, I'm a Christian, right? But then I don't like think about it that much or take it that seriously. I went to like a Christian college for an undergrad degree and just kind of like, hung out with friends, didn't think about it too much. And then I had the experience of going to like a really like communist school and really being confronted with a completely different worldview, which sort of like shocked me awake and said, okay, wait a second. I don't know what I think. I don't know what I believe. So I've got to take this more seriously. So I became more active in church at that point. I guess kind of like the theme verse of that time would be the parable of the parable of the shifting sand, where I believe if you try to build a foundation on anything other than Christ, it eventually collapses. And people can be incredibly intelligent; they can be a million times smarter than me, and they can construct an incredibly elaborate system. But without a foundation, eventually there comes a point where it collapses and it doesn't work or explain God's world anymore. You kind of need to start with God in order to explain or understand a world made by God. So, then I got the heck out of the commie land, but I kept serious about my faith from that point on. So I guess I was forged, but like iron through fire by the experience.
What was the communist school?
Let me think.
Was it like Karl Marx University?
It was just. I'm just being a little jokey about it. It was one of the like major American universities, and I've told some of the stories about it on my channel. Basically, like, just imagine. What's my favorite one? My favorite one is when I went to an art opening show and they had like a guest do some kind of like religious ceremony for rock gods in Africa.
For what?
They had like some guest artist perform a religious ceremony for rock gods in Africa. So they like poured some dirt in the middle of the art gallery, and she poured some wine on the dirt, and then they had like a whole like art against the Second Amendment show.
Art against the Second Amendment.
Was it like they were doing this like as a artistic like interpretive art, or was it like they were doing a worship service, or the worship service was because some of the art was African, so they figured, well, if we're going to have some African art, we've got to worship some African deities at the art show, right? Because that just fits. And then the anti-Second Amendment art was like he built a giant wooden gun, and then people smashed the gun to bits to symbolize their commitment to destroying gun culture in the United States. That is not my craziest story.
Wait, so let me. I know this is a little political here, but so in order to argue against the Second Amendment, arguably because the idea that gun culture is inherently violent. So in order to combat this native evil American violence, they built a giant gun and then smashed it violently.
Right. It wasn't like they were pretty careful about it. I'd say they sort of like gently snapped it in half.
Because the idea is you got to dismantle the system to build the system back up, correct?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's the what's that? The dialectic? Is that the word that Marx used?
The way they should have done it was to build a giant wooden gun and then beg the government to come in and shoot it with their guns.
They should have built a Trojan horse and then
filled it full of anti-gun activists. No, I don't know. Okay.
We like the NRA. Seriously, guys.
Yeah. So changing the subject entirely. Off of guns. But yeah, and it was that's the thing. FlyFox.
Oh, my story's a lot like Doug's and Dan's and old Marmy there. I grew up in the church. I got saved at a very young age, but somewhere along the lines, I started forgetting about the beauty of the gospel. Churches have this really bad habit of preaching the gospel for sinners outside the church and not sinners inside the church, and reminding you that yeah, you are a sinner and you're saved by grace and resting in that. And so throughout my life, it sort of got pushed to the back of my mind as I heard about sermons where, I needed to be a better student, or this is the way not to have sex before you're married, and all those wonderful youth service sermons. And then I went off to the military. So I went off to the Navy and experienced the world for the first time. Because I'd grown up going to church every Sunday pretty much of my life. And then I also went to a Christian elementary and middle school. So I was ill prepared. I mean, I went to public high school, but even then, like, once I got out into the real world, it was a wake up call in a lot of ways. And I got really depressed, and I just couldn't operate. I was depressed. I was like wondering, like, why am I so sinful if I call myself a Christian? And then there was this, through different circumstances, there was this internet radio program called Fighting for the Faith. It's done by this Lutheran guy named Chris Rosebrough. And he would just preach the gospel, man, and focus on Christ and resting in Christ and that forgiveness and that grace that is yours through faith. And it was like my whole paradigm of how I thought about my life was changed, because I remembered suddenly, oh yeah, I'm saved by grace. And so that was really my story. And it continues past that to where I was pursuing ministry and things like that at one point in my life. But at this point, I'm just I'm happy to be saved by grace.
Amen.
Cool. Amen. Captain, you are the last one.
The last one. All right. So
I know I've kept you here silent for a long time.
So I grew up in a divorced home. I lived with my single dad, and we sort of grew up Christian, but we didn't ever go to church or anything like that. I happened to have a good friend that would invite me to like Wednesday, service where you would go and listen to some Bible study and then play games afterwards. And I remember one thing that really distinctly comes to mind was this one girl. She asked me one day, "Oh, you just like playing the games afterwards. You don't really care about, coming to the Bible study." And at the time, I was really pissed off. But as I think about it now, that was probably true. But I think the thing that used to really get me was it never really made sense, and maybe this was because nobody actually sat down with me and explained everything. So then I went and joined the Navy and traveled the world and all that sort of stuff. And I think things really changed for me. Like, a lot of people say that you waste your time in college. And I went to college when I was in my 30s. I'm about to finish up, but I feel like I spent a lot of good years actually learning in college. And that's where a lot of things made sense, at least in my opinion. So I started studying philosophy and stuff like that. And a lot of the, Christian arguments started to make a lot more sense from there. And I feel like I was in, sort of peer pressure to say I was a Christian earlier in life. And now, now that I'm, in my 30s, I feel like I have a good connection, or at least probably not, but I feel like it's a lot better understanding now of Christianity and how the world is.
No, I think that's a valid. Okay, I muted myself earlier because I was adjusting. I got somebody popping firecrackers down the street. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not.
Well, it is almost the 4th.
Yeah, it is. But I was trying to adjust my windows because it's really hot in this room. But also, I'm trying to. I don't know if it's making a difference. Anyway, but no, I think that's a. I think there's a valid idea that the older we get, the more we have to be critical of what we've thought, right? And I think a lot of people fall into skepticism who grew up in the church fall into skepticism in their late teens, early 20s. If they haven't built up this idea of the rationality behind the faith, and looked at all that kind of stuff. I was raised as well as in a Christian home, and I never really had any kind of like huge rebellion or anything. I'm not going to say that I've lived perfectly. I haven't. I've done I've done terrible things. I think everybody can admit that, and I have my own personal view is even to use a metaphor. So even a smart dog is dumber than a dumb person, right? And with that, even a really good person is still really, really awful. I mean, I believe evil in terms of how I use it has a very low bar. And so it doesn't take much to be wretched, to be to need amazing grace to tie it into a well-known hymn. In my growing up, my development, we were very churched people. My grandparents were in full-time ministry, working at a Christian college. My dad at a really Christian high school. My dad had studied to be in the ministry. He ended up being an accountant because it was a really good fit for him. But he'd studied that, and we were always involved in church stuff. I took it very seriously from the time I was very young. But still, the vines of the world will get you. If you're not constantly mindful, if you're not paying attention to those sort of things, and the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Those are easy snares to fall into. But I think that for a lot of people, it's really easy to fall into skepticism, because I don't think that we do a good job in the church, like Fly was talking about, that they forget to tell the gospel to the saints, and I think that sometimes we do a really poor job of explaining why we believe what we believe, and that's part of the reason I personally, I've really always found the apologetics really interesting, because it breaks down what does the scripture mean? How does that relate? What are the arguments? What is the problem of evil? How does that stuff?
It's bad. That's the problem with evil.
Yeah. Did you say death?
It's bad.
No, I said it's bad.
Bad.
Yeah, evil's no good.
That's
the problem with it.
So, Dan was talking earlier about the erasure of Christians from mass media, or people that I don't know. One of my pet peeves. Any of you guys watch Lost? No. Okay.
No. What's the name of that show? What is the name of the show?
It's Lost.
Yeah, I don't watch it. That is not I'm sorry.
I watched the first few seasons of it, before figuring, oh wait, they're just keeping us guessing, right?
Yeah.
There's no answer that could be more interesting than all the theories people are cooking up on the internet.
Well, yeah.
I think I ditched out on season 3 or 4 or something like that.
Well, one of the pet peeves, I watched all of it several times.
No,
I don't necessarily say it's great, but it's intriguing enough a trip that you can almost forgive the last episode for totally whizzing on the fans. But because it does.
So do you think any show doesn't do that though? I feel like every TV show kind of is like a letdown, besides maybe MASH or something.
I don't know. It depends on. I think some of that depends on people's expectations going into it, what they think, how they think the wrap up is. I thought Burn Notice had a great ending arc to it. That's Yeah, that's probably the only one. Yeah, thinking about it. No, I mean, there's MASH was good. At the end of Newhart was great. Anyway, but anyway, I think it's the fourth season, maybe it's the third season in Lost to introduce the character of Mr. Echo, right? Guy who pretended to be a Catholic priest because he's really a warlord and he wanted to escape the consequences of his actions, so he stole his priest brother's identity, right? And that's all well and good, and they had some interesting moral dilemmas with that. The guy has a crisis of faith there, but
That's cool. I didn't know
because he grew up in the Anglican Church in Africa, and then was stolen by warlords. The whole thing. Anyway, blah blah blah. There's one episode where like it's full of this religious imagery, and like it talks about the baptism of Christ, and it absolutely gets the story wrong. It's like nobody who's ever read a gospel would have told the story this way, and it's like they make the assertion that that Christ became Messiah when the dove landed on him, which the dove the Spirit said on him, which is like these people like see a painting of the baptism of Christ and then imagine the rest of the story, or they intentionally trying to misrepresent the deity of Christ, or what? But it was really irritating, and I didn't like it at all.
I think you expect too much from a bunch of Hollywood reprobates.
Yeah, that's probably true. Just basic research. That's all I'm asking for.
Well, and the thing is, probably most of the audience doesn't notice. And I tell you what, tell most Christians about that, they probably wouldn't think anything of it either.
Yeah, I think there's definitely.
What's sad is most Christians are not grounded enough in the Bible to know the difference, and people will go to church and believe something more. They're more likely to believe something on TV than something that's actually in the Bible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Da Vinci Code, when that came out, that was a good illustration of the problem.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The Da Vinci Code is a good illustration of that problem. Oh, Judas had a gospel. That's so cool.
Right.
Why did the church keep this secret from me, bro?
I remember I took a history class about the medieval ages in college, and Gnostics came up at some point. And the teacher didn't know much about the Gnostic Gospels, and so he was saying some stuff that wasn't true, and then like some know-it-all person rose their hand and they started blabbering on about it, and I was like, hold on, they were saying, oh, the Gnostic Gospels say that Jesus was just a man and all this stuff, and he wasn't really God, and I was like, I couldn't let it go, so I raised my hand up and I said, no, it's actually the exact opposite of that. The Gnostics believed that there was an evil demiurge, an evil god that created everything that's physical, and so that Jesus was only a spirit being who didn't have a physical body, because if he did, then he wouldn't be good. And they were like, no, that's not true. And I was like, dude, just look it up, just Google it, man. Like, it takes 2 seconds. And then the
irony of that is that modern people are so much like the medieval Gnostics. Like, I've just been revisiting St. Augustine, right? And he spent a lot of his life as one of these Gnostic dualist types, right? Just exactly what you were describing. And we're cerebral. We understand the nature of reality better than those dummy Christians. We have the hashtag the science, astrology on our side.
Well, and also like that all ties into like the beginnings of alchemy and a lot of that kind of stuff too. And the funny thing is, to me, I really think that a lot of that flows backward to Zoroastrianism, right? The idea of the evil creator and the duality of nature and all that kind of stuff. Which gets, I'm sorry,
Freddie Mercury and whatnot. He was Zoroastrian.
Oh, was he? I didn't. Well, that makes sense. The Hermes Trismegistus kind of thing. So I didn't know that. Yeah. Fascinating.
Well, I think modern evangelicalism can fall into this trap where they view physical matter as evil themselves, which is a heresy.
Yeah.
God created the world and he said it was good. And part of the gospel is the restoration of the entire earth. It's not merely just the salvation of humans, but there'll be a new heaven and a new earth where all things are restored. And we as Christians are looking forward to an eternity with a physical body. There will be a resurrection of the dead, and everyone will have a physical body in the future. It's not like, spirits flying around playing harps for eternity.
Well, and so that's one of the weird things too, is because like I, and maybe this is a hole in my knowledge, right? Is I have a hard time understanding when that transition happened, because the idea of the eternal realm, and the tangibility of the eternal realm was like wired in to American Christianity until X. And I don't know what that was, but we've lost that. I'm not sure if it was
probably the Second Great Awakening with Charles Finney. Revivalism in the late 1800s, I would imagine, had a lot to do with it, because it was less about grounded theology and more about decisional, like feelings based.
What Dan Connor was talking about earlier, Finney kind of like pioneered the like emotional music, right? Let's play emotional music and call you to the altar and hope that the emotional music kind of puts you into this emotional state where you feel good about Jesus, kind of regardless of what you actually believe or what we've actually taught you.
See, and that's actually really funny too. In reflection, it's interesting. Funny is not the right word. It's interesting. One of the things that I studied in high school was the literature of the colonies, right? And we had a class on the literature of the colonies, and we went back and read a bunch of sermons from the First Great Awakening. And "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God" was one of the sermons. Jonathan Edwards was one of the things that we had to read through, and we read it. We talked about it, and I said in class, it was really hard to read through. I mean, there's serious ideas, but there's so many of them that I had a hard time keeping focus on it. And I can see that it being really moving, being orated well. And my teacher says, but Jonathan Edwards would get up, would read it flat and monotone, and sit down. And there was no passion in his reading, according to people's writing, but people were still bawling by the end of it.
Yeah, they'd be like
because of the truth, because of the fact that it's talking about our depravity and our commitment to our self-satisfaction rather than serving the divine being and all that kind of stuff. And it was one of those things of thinking about that contrast between emotionality and that. Emotions that follow the reason, right? That emotions are a rational reaction to truth. That's a normal reaction to truth. I shouldn't say rational, but it's emotions are a rational reaction to truth, but they're not the driver. They should not be the driver in decision making. And I think that's an interesting parallel to draw between that and what you're talking about with Finney, which is not something I was familiar with. So,
yeah, when you look in the late 1800s, that's when you have the rise of Jehovah's Witnesses and other of these.
It also makes sense too because
groups.
It also makes sense too because, I think that's, if I'm remembering this right, that was sort of the time where people openly started saying there would never be a nation of Israel again. I mean, like people had kind of believed that before, and like Thomas Jefferson wrote to his daughter that everything was necessary for the return of Christ, because so many people at that time didn't believe a literal nation of Israel could happen again. In fact, some people believed that America was the closest there would ever be to an Israel, because at least we didn't chase Jews down and beating them out of their homes, which was going all around Europe for centuries. That was a slight dig to Europe. But that was that. So there were a group of Americans that believed that. But I know that idea that there would be no Israel really took off throughout the 1800s, to the point where that was just the default position. And I think that's one of the things that really surprised people about World War II, and why the when the Holocaust was discovered, why there was such a visceral reaction toward that, and the refounding of Israel. But that's a whole different discussion.
Preterism.
I'm sorry.
I just like to name drop random nerdy theological terms.
But I didn't make out what you said. Was it?
Preterism, I think.
Preterism. Oh my goodness.
Preterism.
Yeah.
The idea that basically the Book of Revelation is fulfilled within the first century AD.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the destruction of Israel refers to the one that happened in 70 AD, and not the one in the Left Behind movies, basically.
Right.
I love the Left Behind movies. They're so goofy.
They are. Well, and that actually brings up another good question too. The idea of portrayal of Christianity in comics, in mass media. Of course, I talked about Lost and how annoyed I am that they got so simple things wrong. But Dan was talking about the whole principle of erasure, and like especially in comics, it seems like is because we're so overwhelmed with superhero comics in the majority of the market, right? That's what everyone thinks about. But what are your opinions about the way faith has been portrayed and should be portrayed within the pages of the funny books? Let's start with the captain.
I mean, it's basically like somewhat mentioned, like, you know, Nightcrawler is Catholic, or Daredevil, Captain America, but it's never really like a plot point too much. And I was just thinking about this not too long ago. EC Comics, you know, the famous science fiction and horror, it used to be education comics, and they sold Christian comics, and they were basically losing money until Bill's dad died in a boating accident. And he had to take over. He didn't even want to sell comics, apparently. He didn't want anything to do with the industry, but like he just kind of got pushed into it and, you know, went and did what he did.
Yeah, the picture series in the Bible series and stuff.
I think about that, and I'm like, I wonder if they didn't sell because they were Christian comics, or because they were just bad quality, or what the actual problem. The EC Christian comics.
Yeah,
because I've never actually read them.
No, they're good. They're good. I have some of the even the hardcovers are out of print. I think that the Old Testament one was reprinted more recently. No, they're great. They're very good. I mean, they're 1940s comics, but no, they're very good.
Well, and it's very varying on 1940s comics, because you can tell the difference between somebody that was just making them, or like somebody that was actually trying.
Yeah. No, I agree, but no, they're good. Those ones are good for sure. I watched what was it? There was a photo of early EC, I think, and like, and there you could see like a poster of that, of the picture show of the Bible in the office. So yeah, that was good stuff. EC did good comics.
Doug, what are your thoughts on the comics? Christianity, how it's been portrayed in comics, and how it should be portrayed in comics?
Well, in comics, I see a lot, like I do in other forms of media, and I notice this because I'm from the South. But anytime you see, and this is in comics and everything, anytime you see a preacher that's preaching the gospel out in public, he's kind of mocked, even in the comics. People act like he's some kind of weirdo. He's some kind of bumbling, crazy, you know, evangelist person. They're always the characters that's, you know, the doom and gloom, you know, get right or you're going to die. And Superman shows up and saves the day. I'm just using him as an example. I can't think of a Superman comic with that sort of character. But I don't know. I always see the true fire and brimstone type preachers portrayed as just a fool, a goofy fool to kind of be mocked. But going towards Christianity in the 70s and 80s, remember the Satanic Panic?
Mhm.
The original Ghost Rider series actually originally kind of had the whole Jesus versus Satan thing going on, because before it was Mephisto, it was actually the devil that gave Ghost Rider his powers. And throughout that, Jesus appears to Ghost Rider several times, trying to help him, trying to change his life. And then at some point, it wasn't cool anymore, and Marvel changed the whole story.
Yeah.
But I always
I-
thought that was cool. I
I
love the
think I
old
was
Ghost
actually
Rider.
reading. I think Perch was either reading an article he wrote or a video he did. I think it was Perch, Comics Perch, who was talking about that was actually an editorial decision.
Yeah.
That the writer, whoever it was, I can't remember his name. I'm not sure it was Orlando or what. But was just going to go with it, and then all of a sudden the editor stops in and says, "Wait, you're going to put Jesus in our book? No.
Wasn't that
Can't
Jim
have that."
Clear, or am I mistaken on that one?
I don't know if it was the
I'm not
editor in
sure.
chief or if it was the group editor. So I don't know.
I've got the collection of Ghost Rider somewhere. I need to look and see who was the editor and who wrote that and whatnot.
Did you know, Dan?
Yeah, I thought it was Gary Friedrich that wrote it.
Yeah.
He did write it, yes.
Okay.
But they
Yeah,
never
I
actually
heard
say it's Jesus. They just show Jesus.
They call him
Everybody knows it's
friend.
Jesus. Yeah, it's he. At one point, he dies for Ghost Rider, and Ghost Rider's like, "My friend died for it."
Yeah. I read about that later. Oh wait, no, keep answering your stuff anyway. I don't want to.
Oh, that's. I just remember reading that, and that was the first time I remember just openly seeing Christianity portrayed in a way other than the bumbling street preacher.
Yeah. Personally, I mean, I didn't read those, like, especially when they were coming out, but when I heard about it, I don't actually care for that myself, because it puts Jesus, I think, twofold. Number one, it puts Jesus in the realm of fantasy, and I'm not saying there's not a purpose to it, but it puts Jesus in the realm of fantasy. So you can look up the Marvel Handbook to the Marvel Universe, and then there's a Jesus page, and then it's the Marvel Jesus, if they've done that.
Earth 616 Jesus.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so then there's that, and then it's also I've never really enjoyed Christian fiction in that. Like, I think there was a movie called Chasing the Giants or Facing the Giants or something about the Giants. I thought that was a fantasy. I thought it was like a Lord of the Rings that was more Christian. And then I found out it was like a football movie. And then at the end of it, no, what am I going to do? At the end of it, they were praying so long. And at the end, the coach's wife got pregnant because they wanted to have a baby. And to me, I'm like, well, if you're doing fictionalized things, it almost, like, I think, overshadows the real things in some ways. Not that doesn't happen with the lady and get pregnant. And so I don't love like, when I was a kid, I was like, yeah, because this character's a Christian and this character's Jewish too, and Kitty Pryde and whatnot. And you could go down the X-Men line and see where people, some of them, theoretically had religious beliefs, because the X-Men was about diversity, so they were willing to have some different characters. It makes sense that Ileana and Colossus would be atheists, I think, from what was at the time atheist communism, and it makes sense that Rogue would be like Baptist and Nightcrawler would be Catholic. I don't know where they came up with it, why, but he was German, so maybe he's Catholic from Germany. Who knows? And then I forget what else about those characters. The Guthrie's Cannonball was a Christian, and theoretically, and so was his sister. They were a Christian family, and then Power Pack are Mormons. So all this different stuff. So I like that. But if you have like this, it's almost like apocryphal. Like oh, here's this extra book about Jesus when he's in Ghost Rider or something. So, so I don't love that personally, because I think it can minimalize the reality, and I think that, like, if you have a metaphor and then you put, like, I believe in Jesus, so if I put Jesus into a metaphor, then is he really real? And I mean, again, there's a lot of different elements, and it depends how things are done, but yeah, if I wanted to make just a complete fantasy,
You're trying to avoid having like a reduced. You don't want to reduce Jesus to a plot point, basically.
yeah, exactly, and then I wouldn't want to see, like, here is the issue where Jesus joined the X-Men.
Right.
We got the first mutant. It's the Lord. You know, like, he was walking on water back in the 1st century. He was a mutant. Something like that. I call him exegesis or something. Something like that. To me would just be almost one of the worst things you could do with the X-Men. Like, almost one of the very worst. They've done a lot of terrible stuff with the X-Men, so maybe not the worst, but it would be pretty bad. And so to me, I don't know. I don't love the idea of a fictionalized Jesus, because then
I think that's like you reflect back to what Lewis did with the Chronicles of Narnia, where the character of Aslan is clearly an analog for Christ himself, but he's not reduced or localized because he's part of a fairy tale, right? It's part of a fairy tale. It's not supposed to be. It doesn't look like the real world. And Marvel's whole shtick, right? It's the world outside your window, right? So they're all real cities, they're all real places, all that kind of stuff. And so it's supposed to feel less fictional while more fantastic. But Christ is not that, and I think that's a legitimate argument in that. I think it's also I think that there is as neat as it is to think that in a story as with as much going on as Ghost Rider, right? With the idea that, there's this guy who, felt like he took the wrong way in life and is trapped in a bargain. And can he find redemption? I mean, like, is there a way back from making a mistake this big? That's an awesome theme. And it feels like the kind of thing you'd want to see God weigh in on. But the idea that Christ would descend from the throne of heaven to help out one guy when he can just be omnipresent through the Spirit, when he has an army of angels, and when that's not the pattern we see in Scripture of how Christ interacts with the church, I can definitely see that feeling reductionist, feeling like you're reducing the place as he has as King of the universe.
Well, like, it kind of makes Jesus a pretend character. People don't take it seriously. It's a cartoon Jesus.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be a cartoon.
Yeah, and I think there is value to it, but it's hard, and that's also why, like, say a comic like Spawn, where there's all these different demons, and not that there isn't some historical tradition that influences those characters. Not that I'm an expert on Spawn, but it's like you get into this thing about this mythos that still ultimately it's drawing on the basis of a general Judeo-Christian. The angels are good and the demons are bad, and God's there somewhere, and Spawn has to team up with devils to fight demons to fight God, and he has to team up with God to fight demons. Like, all these things, and like there's this weird mythos, and Spawn has its own thing, and so you have all these versions of these characters. But at the end of the day, like, I think that there are demons, and they might have some of the same names, maybe. Actually, I guess we don't really know the demons. But the historical, like, traditions of, like, the Middle Ages historical concepts of angels and demons.
Right.
And so they're all in this, but it's like this weird, like, I don't think Todd McFarlane even though of course he knows that Spawn is fantasy, I doubt. I don't know. I never.
Todd
But I
McFarlane's
doubt-
an atheist.
What's that?
Todd McFarlane's an atheist. If you,
Is he? Okay.
I'll just let you know.
Okay, yeah. So even more so, I doubt that someone, if they believe in angels and demons, like I doubt that they would be like, well, I believe all these angels and demons are real, but like clearly they don't think that Spawn is real, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
But what's the real part? Like for me, yeah, I can make fantasy about Christian characters, and I can say, yeah, that these are the things they believe, and I believe those things, but I don't believe that those fantasy characters are real. Like you can read the Al Hartley Archie comics, and the things that they say about God, I believe, but I don't believe that he's real.
Yeah.
I still think he's fantasy.
Yeah, and we're talking about Warrior Nun Ariella earlier, and Soulfinder both, that have very heavy elements of Catholicism, or maybe just the set dressings in some cases, because there's the fantasy element to it. But those are and I know with Soulfinder, Doug Ernst went to a lot of work to do his research to make it look not so. It's got a fantastic element, but it still has a grounding in his Catholic faith and in the dogma in that. And I think that's but nobody. It still is a fantasy, and it doesn't separate it, even though it's out there to put a positive light on his beliefs in a fantasy setting. It's not out there to beat people over the head with Catholicism. And I think that's an important aspect about that. But also, it doesn't cheapen the reality of Catholicism, I don't feel, either, through it, just because it takes it. I think part of it's because it takes itself really seriously, but also it doesn't diminish any of those elements that are not fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you mentioned the word dogma, because the movie Dogma, a lot of people actually get theology from that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's from Kevin Smith, who's not shy about being Catholic, but there's probably a movie or two he's made that maybe you wouldn't show at church. And so there's this weird dichotomy where Dogma is mainstream. That movie is mainstream. And it embraces like a religiosity. And I'm sure there's some elements that probably Kevin Smith does believe, because technically if he's a Catholic, and I mean, he talks about, maybe not regularly, but he talks about going to mass, things like that. Clearly he sees a value in those things. Clearly he has a belief in those things. So clearly there's elements of that movie that I anticipate he believes. Probably elements that I believe. I mean, there's a God in it. I believe in God, so I gotta at least agree with that. I haven't actually. I think I've seen part of the movie. I haven't seen all of it. But so you can do that. You can be Kevin Smith. You can make a movie about God. You can talk about going to mass before you start making a movie, and that still can be embraced mainstream. You can write Daredevil and have religious elements of it, but it's like if you still make stuff that is not appropriate for Sunday school, then it's okay. It's like you can be Mel Gibson and get pulled over for drunk driving and say things about Jews, and you can make The Passion. It's almost like if you're going to do something that's really cool Christian, you have to do something that's like really bad, or they'll be like, no, you are a Christian. I hate you. And you're like, but I still get pulled over for drunk driving and say terrible things about Jews, so I can't be that good of a Christian, right? So I think that's what it was. So it's like you can do that. You can make the movie Dogma as long as you made jokes about bestiality and chasing Amy. So there's some weird dichotomy. Like you can get away with, like, when there were some books I was working on for Lamppost, that have been forbid books, and Diamond said they wouldn't touch anything from the publisher, nothing from the publisher. They're like, no, we will not touch this because you are Christian, so we will not look at it. And like they just vetoed the entire stack of books. They're like, we can't do that. They're like, we won't carry anything religious. But then you can have all these religious references in X-Men, and it doesn't matter. You can have Messiah Complex, or you can have, I think Joe Kubert does the Bible from DC. They'll release that. They'll release.
Or how about all the like blasphemy comics?
Yeah, Second Coming by was it Richard Pace and what's the writer?
Yeah, I mean, you see tons of them coming out
you can do that
throughout the years.
Yeah, Jesus can be in comics. There's plenty of comics like that, and like you can do that. And in some ways, I would love a comic about a Superman stand-in compared to Jesus. And the Superman stand-in would be terrible. The Superman stand-in would be the guy that wants to be the savior.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jesus would be like, no, I'm not gonna beat the Roman army for you because that's what you want.
Kind of like maybe like something that's kind of being referenced here, but we haven't quite said, is like, is there a different approach for a non-Christian approaching this who would like to write well about Christianity, and a Christian approaching this who wants to have their work as an artist sort of reflect their faith? And I feel like for both, like, understanding the faith is sort of like that's like a fundamental, like, if you don't know what it is, you don't know how to say anything about it in the arts.
It can't be done.
Right. So like a fedora tipper who just has read a blog post about Christianity doesn't really have enough knowledge to say anything interesting about it. And maybe, like, in contrast, I think like an atheist who's actually knowledgeable of it, like Nietzsche, I think, will write very emotionally about his atheism in a way that actually moves me. Where I don't want to say like Nietzsche sort of illustrates. Nietzsche as an atheist kind of illustrates one reason why I'm a Christian is because I think he kind of understood, like, what it is, you know, we all we have left is despair if God is dead, right?
Exactly.
Right.
If I'm not a Christian, I'm going to be the most hardcore nihilist there is. That's all there is. There's nihilism and there's Christianity.
Right.
I don't see being nice otherwise. Not that
No, I'm 100% on board with you with that. I would have already drank myself to death if I didn't believe that you know, God was real.
I think as Christians, like, there's been this realization that at some point during the 20th century, Christians, like, abandoned the arts. And, you know, Francis Schaeffer started talking about that stuff in the 60s and 70s. And I got some quotes here from him where he said, I'm afraid that as evangelicals, we think that a work of art only has value if we reduce it to attract. And then he also said, as evangelical Christians, we have tended to relegate art to the very fringe of life. The rest of human life we feel is more important. Despite our constant talk about the lordship of Christ, we have narrowed its scope to a very small area of reality. Like
art in the Bible, right?
Right.
Yeah, you know? Required reading.
Well, and the funny thing about that, right, is like that how then shall I live?
How shall we then live?
Yeah.
That's his famous book.
But that's one of the things that's really, like, an interesting, like, point, right? Because, like, we've been talking about this idea, like, so Tim Lim is in the chat. He says, are there any Catholics on this post? No, we didn't get any papists this time, man. Sorry. Oh, I can only have 6, so somebody would have to leave. Yeah. That's the limitations.
I was just about to recommend the most anti-Catholic book ever as a good read.
Jack,
do it, man. Do it.
All right, so it's The Lion of Aurora by illustrated by Jackie Lewis, and who's the writer? It's a historical novel on Joshua Janavel, who is actually like a proto-Protestant. So it's told from the perspective of Protestants, like the Catholic Church are the oppressive force in this book. But I would hold it up as an excellent work of, like, if you're sort of starting with the question of how do I talk about Christianity in the context of fiction, The reason it's specifically good is it takes seriously the fact that these are characters of different faiths, and their faiths are a primary motivation in how they act. I don't know much about the writer. If I just had to guess, I'd guess it was written by a believing Christian who takes this seriously. But I could even imagine like anyone who took seriously, like, if I'm going to write about Christianity, I actually have to understand the key issues and how important it is to the characters. It really surprised me because it just kind of like came out of the blue. I think it was published by No1 Press. That's like the best religious comic book specifically I've read. Like maybe just like real quick, like things to think about, like maybe outside of comics, because there's a writing dimension of comics and an art dimension of comics. I was going to recommend Art in the Bible by Francis Schaeffer, and I just think that Tolkien, G.K. Chesterton, and C.S. Lewis are kind of like the three big people to read, where the three of them all kind of debated the arts and writing. Lewis and Tolkien especially had a really neat back and forth on like how do you, as a Christian, kind of reconcile creating a fictional universe if the fictional universe isn't true. So I guess that's my way of making it up to Tim Lynn in the chat. Two of my four recommended reads are Catholics, Chesterton and Tolkien, and then Schaeffer for a Reformed perspective. Actually, I'd say like maybe Will Eisner for a Jewish perspective. It's kind of like as a non-Christian one, but at least relevant to the overall topic of encountering God in fiction and also specifically in comics. A Contract with God. It's tragic, I think. It's partially because he's wrestling with his identity as a Jew, and the end of A Contract with God is it's a very, very sad book, right? Because I don't think Will Eisner could find, like, because he can't find hope in Christ. Eisner kind of concludes that the Jewish life is one of constant tragedy. But Eisner's entire collection of work, I think, is just like a really good model for how to approach the topic, basically with serious thought, and as one that has impact on people. Like we live in the tragic world. The problem of pain is sometimes hypersimplified to like a dumb argument against God, but it is a really profound thing within people's lives that they experience. So my attitude as a Christian would be, if you encounter pain in life and you write about it and you put that into your comics, if you tell the truth about it, it's almost like you may not even need to reference Christ in a specific work for the novel you write or the comic you create to express something that I guess fits with the world as God creates it. Basically, I come down to tell the truth in whatever you write.
Well, I think that's actually got a biblical precedent, right? The Book of Esther, which is obviously a work of art, right? And because it has everything a novel has. It has your motivations. It's got your sub arcs. It's got the main plot. It's got the moving, the connotation, all that kind of stuff. Even though I believe it's history, it's still written in a narrative style that has all of the fittings that novels have. It's absolutely artistic with it. But at the same time, it's heavily religious, but God is not mentioned in it, like directly, right? And so that was a big debate at different times in discussion of the canon, is should it even be included when it isn't mentioned that, and this whole thing, I don't want to get into that whole thing, but I think there's a definite precedent to the idea that you can tell Christian stories that aren't overtly so, and I think that's a thing. Well, I want to get back to we're getting close to the 2 hour mark, but I want to get back to one point here. We're talking about the importance of Christianity in the arts, and that's a conversation that we've been having, since the 60s, right? But there has not been a shortage of people trying to make Christian art. It's just that a lot of it hasn't been very good, right? And I'm not trying to bag on things, but like you're talking about the Facing the Giants, the Fireproof. There's quality in it, but there's something not quite right about that's just I'm not sure And I think sometimes it's a case-to-case thing. But do you guys think, because I have a suspicion that in our attempt to make overtly Christian art, that that the art is secondary to the messaging enough that's part of what's going on?
I'm gonna go tuck my kids in, but I want to answer that.
Okay.
Because I like that question.
We will commit to stay on till you get back.
Okay. I'm just...
So I was thinking, I've been thinking about this sort of the whole stream, this idea of like, why is Christian art so bad? And part of it is because instead of just focusing on what is true and good, we focus on this idea of, well, we can't be realistic, and we can't have realistic violence in our story, or we can't have a realistic conflict between a husband and a wife, or we can't have sex in this because, well, this is meant for Christians. But then you're presenting this sanitized world that doesn't resonate with people. I'm not saying if something has to be graphic, but like at least being true about what the world is like. And that's not something that historically people really worried about, because when they wrote literature, they were writing it as the world was. And then at some point, for whatever reason, Christians switched to this, like, well, if I'm gonna make a comic book, well, then it has to be themed around something explicitly Christian. Like, I remember there was this comic as a kid that I read called Archangels. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that.
Oh yeah, I've got a bunch of them.
I remember. I remember that property. Yeah, it was like advertised along with Veggie Tales.
Right, and it was like, instead of just making a good comic that's true and right, and then if you're reflecting what is true, you're trying to focus and cram this gospel, this explicit gospel message into your movie, so that there's an altar call where people will come to faith, instead of doing what the old masters did, like someone like a Lewis or a Chesterton or somebody, where you're writing about what is true and right and letting that be enough.
So here's a question on this. This is an interesting idea about the altar call in the comic. That's an interesting idea. Do we think, or do you guys think, this is something I have never pondered before, but in terms of discussion of evangelism and apologetics and everything, the questioning of the validity of the sinner's prayer, of the import of all of that was a huge part of 20th century Christianity. Has the idea of the altar call ruined Christian art? Is that the thing, that the idea that there can be a single moment of conversion that can be like manipulated or brought forward or all that kind of, and I'm not trying to like bag on the work of Billy Sunday or what's his name, Billy Graham, who have done the big crusades, because I think that there is definitely a place for that sort of thing, but as the ubiquitous form of evangelism, is that a thing that is detrimental to the artistic impulse?
I don't think so. I think what hurts Christian art is that it's Christian first and art second. And I know in a way you're supposed to put Christ above everything, but when you're doing art, it should be the same way you live your life. You don't have to go out in the street and every person you see yell, "I'm a Christian. I believe in God. Hey, you. Hey." You don't do that. You live your life to where people look at you and go, "Hey, I like that guy. Why is that guy the way he is? Why does that guy seem to have a smile on his face, when everything's falling apart around him? What's going on with that guy?" Your art should be the same way. Your art should tell a good story. It should be story first. You can write Christian characters in. You can write other things in that are an example. You can drop a character in there that's throwing out Bible verses left and right. But everybody is so concerned with making a sermon or a message that builds up to this altar call, that's all the art has become. You know what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
It's
Let me ask this question real quick. So I was just thinking about this while you were talking. And do you think then that like a movie like Gran Torino then would be like a Christian type movie then, under your like explanation that you're just talking about?
it's been such a long time since I watched Game.
I mean, it's been a long time since I've watched it too,
Yeah.
but
So
like
I
actually God, because of some of the stuff that he did during the Korean War and stuff. And he has like, you know, a good story arc. He has a good redemption arc at the end. And it's kind of along the lines that you're talking about right here.
Yeah, I remember he struggles with that the whole time. He's always seeing the priest, and his wife always prayed for him and stuff. That is a good example now that you
Or
mentioned.
like the Apostle with Robert Duvall is another one where that's taking faith seriously, and it's something that compared to what the Christians made during that same period is far and away a way better Christian film. You know,
A good piece of Christian art should make you think. Like you're talking about Gran Torino and the Apostle. You think about, you know, he keeps going to the priest and he keeps talking to the priest and trying to find peace with that. That it should make you think about it. It doesn't have to shove it down your throat and be a message. It should lead you to that, you know.
And I think that's one of the strengths in Soul Finder. And I've talked about this a lot on my channel. I've had Doug on several times to talk about it, but I can't stop talking it up. So sue me. It's my show. Anyway, but no, one of the things is Father Redder has a rough life and gets no real resolution out of it, right? But his faith is the strength to continue through the trouble, and there's just more trouble waiting on the other side of the trouble, right? and that's one of the things that I think that feels so real. I was talking about earlier in the stream about, you know, my overweening feeling of evil, right? That I just the corruption of our bones, the corruption of our lives, that we're just not the people we should be. Every day is a struggle to not be the ass. Every day is a struggle to not be cruel to my children. Every day is a struggle to not be selfish when I be upset that I don't get the lunch that I want. All those sort of petty, stupid little things that make us that reveal the weakness of our character. And that's one thing I think is about it. And I think a lot of Christian art, just because they want it to reflect the hope and the completion that Christ brings, they make everything have the super saccharine ending. And I think the endings are where a lot of these stories fall down on. And I think that's part of it. And one of the things to your earlier point, Fly, Metal was talking that you were mentioning that that a lot of Christian art is so soft when they're afraid to be violent, where the Metal points out the Bible is extremely violent. And
right, and it has a ton of rape and sexual sin in it, but not it's not treating those things as good. No. But it's representing them in an accurate way. Yeah. And so, like, the point is, you can do those things in a good Christian way.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things to Doug's point earlier, that a good Christian movie should be like any good movie, where it really makes your head, whether it's a comic or movie, whatever, it makes you think. It draws you into mind. And I think it's so weird that we don't have that in Christian media. There is some, but it's not as ubiquitous as I think it should be, because really Christianity is supposed to be a thinking man's religion, right? We are called.
Let me ask this real quick: do you think that some of it has to do with consumerism culture and the fact that you just want to get a product out there for people to buy and consume?
What sells?
Yeah, I think maybe that's some of it. I
think that does have a big, it's like, here's the Christian story. It's got to hit these many points, and we can sell it to this church, and they'll bring the youth groups in. I think that's a part of it.
And I think that at least I think that there is that. I definitely believe that there is that element in Christian media, right? And I think Christian music, the especially as it came about in the late 90s, early 2000s, was a definite example of people that were in the scene that were producing for that market just because they were in the scene producing for that market. I'm not trying to disparage people, but I mean, just, I believe that happened with certain cases. So, Dan, before you left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that it's a main question of independent versus corporate, because I don't think it's even a religious question. Like when I was watching one of the Left Behind movies, I was like, okay, this is I was like, this is the same quality as like a Hallmark movie or a sci-fi movie. Like it's decent for a TV movie, but they were doing, and I mean, for the most part, independent productions, and they're released theatrically. And so if you had a movie that was completely secular, it was just an independent film with a budget of the same. Like I think that those Fireproof movies, or those I don't know all the ones that Chasing the Giants and all the.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the production studio that does
yeah,
it.
Yeah, but so those, and don't get me wrong, they got some cool stuff with them. They do, but like the first one, even I think was like literally like almost like a no budget movie. Like they didn't really plan about it.
The Flywheel, I think, was the name of it.
Yeah, that was the one. Yeah, and so then a couple movies later, they're doing like theatrical releases. We'll go to any B movie, Z movie film director and tell him you're gonna make a movie with no budget, and then you're gonna make a movie with a decent budget with Kirk Cameron. That literally, if you're in your 30s, maybe late 20s or older, you know who Kirk Cameron is because he was on a sitcom. You could go to anybody and be like, hey man, do you know who Kirk Cameron is? They're gonna be like, no, I don't know who that is. And you say, hey man, you like remember Growing Pains? Yeah, man, I remember. Like you can make that as a point of reference to pretty much anybody, And so then they're exploded onto the national scene with a movie that it's really just an independent film, and I think we're not comparing it to other independent films of the same budget, because those are just as bad. No, it's true. As far as filmography, as far as or not filmography, but cinematography.
Right.
They're just as bad. But we're comparing Flywheel and Chasing the Giants. We're comparing those to Hunger Games and whatever we like at school. I don't know what people like, Harry Potter. And whereas if you take Lord of the Rings by a major studio, a corporate film, that's different. It's also like if you take the Roger Corman Fantastic Four, amazing movie. It's very good. And you compare that to the corporate Fantastic Four. Well, yeah, cinematography, it's not the same. There's like almost no special effects. So you're not going to compare those. And I think that's the problem with we're taking Christian films and we're having them compared to corporate big budget. And nowadays, there's only a few movie studios. Disney and Warner. I mean, Disney is Fox. You got all that stuff together. And I think comics even more so. There'll be some Christian comic, and it'll be like, oh man, this is so cool. And you compare it to the best of the Avengers. I'm not really a fan of what they do these days. Actually, let me take it back. I don't really know what they do these days. But last time I did know what they were doing, I wasn't a fan. I haven't followed it back. I follow the Bat books some. I don't buy a lot of them every month, but I keep my eye on them. But I think that's the issue. And I always used to see people talk about that on the Christian Comic Art Society page. And it's not that we're comparing Christian to secular. We're comparing independent low budget to multimedia corporation. And if you take Christian comics that are independent and you stack them up against any independent comics, I don't think that they're any worse. But the thing is, you get churches and major populations who will embrace it because it's Christian. Movies less than comics.
Right.
So then you have like this juxtaposition of something that has an audience because they've got a megachurch behind it that has no business being theatrically released as far as budgets go, but they're able to get the backers to release it theatrically, and then we compare Fireproof to Twilight or whatever came out that year, and I mean, and I guess people say that.
I would like to point out Fireproof is a better movie than Twilight.
Yeah, that could be. I actually think the Twilight movies are fine. I like them. I could defend those. I mean, I've seen them like once, but I could defend them. Those are good movies for what they are as well. But yeah, that. So I don't know what else was coming out. What was contemporary?
Yeah, I couldn't.
Fireproof. But you got an independent, like hardcore independent. You got a team of like this is just a small studio up against every major studio. And I think VeggieTales is a standout because that actually was cutting edge. That was leading CGI animation. Like VeggieTales was out before Toy Story, I think. At least the early ones.
My kid loved watching VeggieTales when he was, a toddler.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Is the bunny song appropriate for Christian art then?
What's that?
The original uncensored bunny song. Is it appropriate to include that in Christian art?
You that is too wonderful for me. I don't know anything about anybody's song, but I'm gonna give you that one. I don't know.
No, I actually that's one of the things that I think because I do think it's appropriate in terms of Christian art, but the problem is that there's not, because art's not supposed to stand on its own, right? Art's supposed to exist within, and I really believe this is true. Art is supposed to exist within a paradigm, within a culture of conversation, right? The David isn't there just so it can be there. The David is there so that we can absorb it, and absorbing it takes conversation, takes people discussing it. This thing, why is there this naked guy next to a church? We have to have that conversation. We're supposed to have that conversation with people. And
what's the bunny song? What is it?
It's the from Rack Shack and Benny.
Okay. Yeah, it's.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw the Rack Shack and Betty. Oh, the bunny song. Is that when he worships the rabbit or something?
Yes.
Right.
The great chocolate bunny.
Yeah, I think it's fine for a heathen to sing, but
yeah, yeah, because that's one of those things where like if your kids are going around singing the bunny song, well, that's
I don't love my mom. I don't love my dad.
Yeah,
and
my kids sing stuff like that every day. They sing, "No, I'm not going to go to bed." It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, it is.
I sing it a lot too, about all sorts of things. I sing it about, I'm going to watch this show on Netflix, even though I know the Lord's with me, but I know you might not want to be watching it, although he saw it when he needed to. Like, I'll sing that.
But I think it's one of those things where, because it's supposed to be in a conversation, because the whole thing is a metaphor for idol worship. The whole thing is a metaphor for being, for transgressing our greater purpose. And I don't think that, because that's what was going on with the whole idol thing to begin with in the fiery furnace episode. And if we don't have that conversation, I think we're missing out on a chance to understand our place in the scheme, where we sit with our relationship with the divine. And I think that you have to, and I think that bunny song that does a great job of putting that in language for children,
Yeah.
And it gets a little twisted when you stop to think about King George and the Ducky and realize what that duck represents. You're like, when you get old enough to make the connection with David and Bathsheba, all of a sudden it gets very, very dark.
I don't think I made the connection yet.
But yeah,
I know my kids have reached the age of accountability. I just hope I haven't yet.
Oh, you're dropping some spicy Christian content for us to debate right there.
Thank you. I'm not sure when mine's going to be. I just hope it's not soon.
Oh man, this has been a good conversation, guys. But it is we're past time. So before we go,
one last closing thought. One last closing thought. The greatest Christian novel of all time is Crime and Punishment, and it's about an axe murderer who falls in love with a prostitute. That's my closing thought.
What's it called?
Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky.
Oh.
Yeah, I've
If
actually
you make it through that book, you'll be praying to God to save you.
That's good.
So, thank you guys so much for coming on. The traditional ending of a stream involving comic creators is a chance to pitch any projects you want people to know about. Doug, you look like you're about to fall asleep. Tell us before you pass out.
I'm good. Hey, my buddies Shabby and Pickles, they're running their book Vestry right now. You can find it on Indiegogo. It's VESTRI. I'll be packing that up and shipping it for them. So go check that out and show those guys some love. They're good. They're good guys.
And they did reach their funding goal today, which is amazing. So congrats to those guys. I know they've been working really hard behind the scenes for several months to get that ready to go. So that's very cool. Dan, what are you working on stuff right now?
Yeah, I am. I'm actually working on the black and white edition of the Nightmare Before Christmas manga. So I'm taking, because originally I colored it, so now I did a fair amount of drawing as well with it, like along with the inks and the pencils. So right now I'm taking that and I am stripping out pages where I did more drawing, and I'm stripping out the colors and then leaving what I added with the inks. So a lot of them might have even been corrections, like let's say, hey, change this, change that, and instead of going back to pencils, I'll just do it. So that's what I'm working on right now. Nightmare Before Christmas Zero's Journey, number 18 hit stores yesterday, and number 19 was forthcoming. That's it right now. I took a major, with this whole COVID thing, I went and got another marketing job, and kind of, thankfully, actually, I think that it gave me the opportunity to do so, because not that I wasn't. I mean, I was kind of seeing if the whole be a homeless comic artist thing would work, and just drive around the country and be a homeless person, and then do comic conventions. And once the comic convention stopped, I just couldn't. So I got another job, and so I'm not having to do comics to make money right now. And also say for variant covers and stuff, I wanted to do one for The Last Ronin, that new Turtles book, but I just can't really justify. Well, it was twofold. I didn't find a store that wanted to do there was a couple, but just with everything with COVID, it was hard. Finance stuff, a lot of stores don't have a lot of extra money, and then also for me, if I'm not going to be going to hit up, I don't know, 50 signings and conventions a year, it doesn't make sense for me to have a whole print run the same way. So I'm kind of limiting some of that, but I don't have to sell comics right now to make money. So that's kind of how I like the things I really like to do, whether it's ministry or comics. I don't want to have to rely on those to pay bills, because then it gets really messy. And it's also not a lot of fun driving around the country being a vagrant. So
Yeah.
it's really not that fun.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm just doing a lot of custom action figures. Just painting a lot of my furrows. This is a PandaCon for the comic book authentic costume for PandaCon.
Cool.
That's what I'm looking for.
Marmaduke.
All
Tell
right,
us.
I am currently working on Jane Smith, Wannabe Gladiator. If you are interested in Christianity and the arts, I think you'll really appreciate the themes of this story. The first 29 pages are free to read on Webtoons. Just Google Jane Smith, Wannabe Gladiator, and it will come right up.
Cool. Captain, tell us, what are you up to?
Well, I mean, I've been making YouTube videos. Well, I made 2, I guess, on my new channel, the 10 Cent Story. I also wanted to, I'll put the link in the only campaign I saw that I wanted to shout out was Ghostly Tales by Snyder and Ditko. So they're still putting out Steve Ditko work. And it's made its goal. It's got 5 days left. And when is it going to be coming out?
I didn't know about that. I do want to support that.
September 2020. So very immediately after summer is over, when school starts again.
Scott Snyder and Steve Ditko. Wow.
And of course, your channel is the 10 Cent Story. The link should be in the description, but it's not. I will probably fix that later. And so then, FlyFoxPro.
Well, I do have a webtoon comic called Peter the Problematic Person, but I haven't updated it in a while, and I don't want to know when it's going to get updated. But I am working on stuff currently, which I sometimes stream on my YouTube channel, FlyFoxPro, including a comic I'm going to pitch to a certain someone on the stream here. Yeah, I'm excited for the future, man.
And I am, of course, your, I will say humble host. I'm not sure that's something I can self-apply, but there you have it. I do make Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't. Moving on. I write comics and color for Ideal Comics. You can find our webcomic Forces Good and Evil updates twice a week right now. We are finishing up the last story, and it'll be going on to hiatus while we work on some other projects. If you want to support us, you can find us on Patreon at ideal_comics, where we are building a universe. So there you have it. Also, next week, we are not having a show because I am co-hosting an opening to an art exhibition here in my town.
Whoa.
At my day job, I work with children's mental health concerns, and we co-host a mental health awareness art exhibition annually. And next Thursday is the opening. So I am not going to race through my opening to come home to have a show. So we're not having one next week. And I don't have the week after that booked yet, but I'm sure we'll be doing something interesting and fun. Who knows? And so that's where things are at the minute. Thank you so much for tuning in, chat, for chiming in. And for all of my guests, thank you guys for coming on. It's been a fun conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks. So until next time, go out there, read some comics, and take it to the people, man. So have a good one, and ciao.